I'm going to welcome you all today. I will say that the whole purpose of this afternoon is not to convince you to travel yet. Instead, we want to take a moment and have fun, talk about travel, and yes, dream about those places we want to go very, very soon. You may be wondering, who am I and how did I get to be here? My name is Angela Caes. I am a local resident of Reading. I'm so happy to be a member of the Adult Programming Committee, and I happen to also own a local travel business for several years called Fernleaf Travel. Basically, what I do is engineer travel memories for people. I have a full-service travel agency here located in Reading, and I go all over the world, not only with my family, but send all my friends and family away too. And that is how I've had a long experience and a beautiful relationship with a company called Lindblad Travel. Lindblad Expedition. I have to take a moment here and just say that Lindblad is the foremost authority on Antarctica. And you may ask, well, why is that? They have been going to Antarctica since 1966. And in fact, they bring their citizen explorers. They are the foremost authority of expedition leaders who have been traveling down there for 50 plus years. In fact, I was reading a really interesting fact today that told me that they have something called mud maps, which I may have to ask about, but these are the secret maps that only their captains know ins and outs of all the little nooks and crannies down there in Antarctica that is not only shared around the world, but shared and renowned to be very accurate and helpful for those who are traveling to the region. So Lindblad Expeditions is excited to be here today. I'm thrilled that they have taken the time out and we get to speak with two of the foremost experts. Let me take a moment and introduce our panelists today. First and foremost, I'm going to start with my cross-country skier here. This is Lisa Bain. Lisa is Vice President of North American Sales for Lindblad Expeditions. And actually, that doesn't say anything about her. She is a foremost traveler around the world, originally from Australia. She is a fantastic human, a phenomenal sense of humor, and an expert on all things expedition. I'm thrilled she's here today, and I did have to ask her what's new in her life. And she's let me know that, yes, she has a new dog, Mimsy. She'll have to tell you all about her. But Mimsy is new into the Bain household, and she's coming to us today from Nashville, Tennessee. Second, and I'm delighted to thank her for joining us, is Jen Martin. Jen is an expedition leader extraordinaire. For years and years and years, she's been away from home more than she's ever been home. This is a whole new experience for her during a pandemic to be rooted so much. So luckily for us, she did also rescue a dog named Freya. So we have a lot of new canine friends here, a lot of travel friends here, but Jen will be taking us on the ins and outs, not only about what an expedition is to Antarctica, but able to answer all of our questions, all of the things that she's seen over her many, many years of going back and forth. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let the experts do the talking. I will say that throughout the webinar, please feel free to ask questions. We may hold off either answering the questions if we know the answers are coming up soon, or we'll go ahead and have a great dialogue throughout. You can expect about 20-25 minutes of chat, and then we're going to open it to full Q&A. So get those answers ready, get those questions ready, and we will roll and go. So Jen, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. Hopefully you'll see us there.
Okay, and I should be sharing my screen now. Can everyone see that and give a thumbs up, or Lisa and Angela? Okay, so I'll be talking you through a few things about Antarctica, and Lisa also is quite an expert, so she'll be interjecting. She's got a lot of information to share as well, so we're just going to kind of tag team you through this. But we wanted to start with an image that is fairly iconic in Antarctica, and that is, of course, Gentoo penguins. Let's see. Oh, try again. Okay, so just to give you a bit of an introduction about Antarctica, one of the things that makes this place so unique amongst other places anywhere in the world is that it is a small continent entirely surrounded by one ocean. It's called the Southern Ocean. And the thing that that does is it keeps this place separate from any place else in the world. Biologically, weather-wise, it's quite different. And of course, we're looking at it from directly the southern pole straight down south, and it keeps it very, very cold. Antarctica is also unique because this is a place that doesn't have year-round permanent human habitation. There are science bases all over the place managed by different countries, but Antarctica is not owned by anyone. It's part of a treaty that was formed in 1961 amongst about 54 to 55 countries who all said they agreed that this would be a place that would not have year-round settlements, it would not have any military presence. It is for science and for peace. And I think those two things are really important to know about what makes it so unique. So keep this kind of in your mind and focus now on the peninsula, the part that's sort of in the top left corner of the screen. That you can see now at the very bottom of my screen. That is the Antarctic Peninsula, and we're going to be going through that in a little bit more detail because that is really the place that's most often visited by travelers. What you can also see in the top of the screen is the southern tip of South America, and that's where the town of Ushuaia sits. Ushuaia is often the gateway that's utilized to go down to Antarctica. Many of you are probably very familiar with the Drake Passage, the famed Drake Passage. One of the reasons that it's so well known is its potential for rough weather. It's not rough all the time. Lisa and I have both crossed it.
Yes, we have.
Can be, yeah, Lisa, what was your experience?
You know, we had totally flat on the way down, and then we had the total opposite on the way back, which to nearly everyone on board, they were ecstatic that we actually got the waves on the way back. And I know we're going to chat about that in a little while, about why you should cross that Drake Passage, because it is kind of a rite of passage.
I think that's a good way to put it. And it is really the necessary crossing to get to what makes Antarctica amazing. But it's quite narrow, and you can see that all of the water from the entire Southern Ocean as it rounds the continent passes through this narrow section, and that's one of the reasons it has the propensity for sometimes rougher weather. I've also included the Falkland Islands and South Georgia Island on here. I'll just touch on those at the very end of this to tell you a little bit more about them. They are considered sub-Antarctic islands. So this is Ushuaia. It's actually a really beautiful town. It looks like a small ski town, and it is in the austral winter time. We visit there in the austral summertime. So this is the summer view or the spring view of Ushuaia. And again, it's in Tierra del Fuego at the southern tip of South America, but it's a good gateway to cross the Drake Passage and head to the Antarctic Peninsula. Many of the ways that people get there are by ship, and the small ships are probably some of the most popular because they are designed for this kind of condition. They're designed for rough weather, they're designed for ice, they're designed for small groups of people to get you onshore into small zodiacs, exploring this place in a way that it's meant to be seen. You don't want to be there with large groups of people. So small ships are the ways that we typically take people down there. And then this is the Drake Passage. Lisa mentioned this, and the Drake is extraordinary, not just because of the weather conditions. It's a place where some people see their very first albatross, and in some cases you can see a wandering albatross. This is a black-browed albatross pictured here, and their wingspan, black-browed is probably about 8 to 9 feet. A wandering albatross is about 12-foot wingspan. They're incredible. And you can see that this is a place where wind is required to help wildlife live. You can't get around and fish for fish if you don't have wind to keep you aloft. So it's a wonderful way to experience some of the wildlife as we cross. This is a picture of a Minke Whale. This is a very productive ocean, a lot of nutrients there. So this is one of the other reasons that people come. So much wildlife comes down here because of all of the nutrients in the water, and people come because of the wildlife, of course. These are dusky dolphins. What you're looking at, that big orange piece, is what we call the bulbous bow. It's looking from the bow of the ship directly down into the water and watching the dolphins as they kind of make their way ahead of the ship.
And I'm going to jump in there and say, I actually took that photo, and I think I had 2 people hanging on to me by the ankles. As I was kind of leaning over the edge, but they were with us for, gosh, 2 or 3 hours just riding the bow wave, and it was amazing. They just played. It's just spectacular.
It's quite a nice thing to find animals initiating the contact with people. Okay, so this is the Antarctic Peninsula. So you cross the Drake Passage, you come down to the peninsula, you see a little ring of islands just across the top there, and those are the South Shetland Islands. The ships often visit those as well because they also have quite a bit of wildlife. But the peninsula, geographically speaking, is not very large. However, in that you have a tremendous amount of beauty and of wildlife here. It's very, very rugged, steep-sided cliffs, lots of rocky headlands, deep bays that poke in, ice that tumbles down into the water, giant icebergs that come, and habitat for seals and penguins, and of course, whales in the water itself. It's a tremendous gift to have this place available to visit because it is so extraordinary. So as you come across the Drake Passage, one of the things that is the best part about it is the arrival to Antarctica. Coming across this waterway, you cross what's called the Antarctic Convergence, which is where the weather changes, the sea temperature changes, you sometimes get a fog bank, and you follow that as you approach the peninsula, and then it usually opens up to seeing incredible icebergs and mountains in the distance. It really is the way to approach, and I know Lisa she's a big fan of that aspect as well.
Yeah, and I might jump in here and just say, look, that feeling of anticipation that builds as you cross the Drake Passage, you turn right out of the Beagle Channel and you head off into this amazing ocean, and first you see those albatross, and then you start to see those first little chunks of ice, and everybody gets so excited. It's the size of a VW Beetle, and it's like, you can see the expedition team going, yep, it's ice. And then you get something the size of a house, and then something the size of a city block. And it's this every moment of the crossing, it builds and builds, and the first penguin and the first whale, and then a group of penguins. And then all of a sudden you see this peninsula rise out of the horizon in front of you. And I think it kind of hits people then that they're one of so few on this planet that will actually ever have the opportunity to be there. It's really quite overwhelming, but it is something you need to do to truly appreciate arriving into Antarctica. It just sets the stage for the entire experience.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. So as you start to approach and as you get closer to the peninsula, you start to see this again, really dramatic landscapes. And when you really put Antarctica at its heart, it is rock, ice, and penguins. Those are the three elements that really define this place, but that doesn't even do it justice. If you see this photo, it's absolutely stunning, and it is very rugged, and you can see again why human habitation here has always been very difficult, and the science stations even are challenged with it year after year. The ice is extraordinary. You can see the piece in front of the ship here. This is probably 2 to 3 times the size of the ship. It's hard to gauge the perspective on it. But these are big pieces of ice that have fallen off the continent. And in some cases, they've fallen off an ice shelf. And they can be, in many cases, 10, 20, 30 miles in length or in width. They're absolutely gigantic. Ones like this that are bright blue probably broke off the same and then broke into smaller pieces and have this beautiful blue color to it. The ice is something that I think people are expecting but surprised by how much they really enjoy. And you really get a chance to see it up close from the ship. And also we do some Zodiac cruises that go around the ice floes, and I'll be showing you that in just a moment.
Yeah, the color is spectacular. I think that's what takes people's breath away. It doesn't matter if you've got an overcast sky, or so often you have these beautiful blue skies in Antarctica, and just the color changes every moment. And so from a photography standpoint, people come for the wildlife, but they really are taken aback by the beauty of the ice.
Absolutely. And I think also ice fever gets to be a thing. You try to get the single best photograph that you possibly can. We've had some questions come in. Just to briefly mention, you mentioned how few people travel there a year. I may not have the numbers correctly, but in my mind, there's about 58,000 people in the height, which it's been growing astronomically over the past couple of years. So I know there's some eager thoughts about climate change and what you're seeing. We'll get to that question. But just so you know, there's about 58,000 people who were, not currently, traveling there over a period of time. And by all intended, people want to see that many people again. But maybe at some point you can chat about just the amount of tourists and the intense desire versus the ability to keep a sustainable tourism going in this very fragile area.
Yeah, I will say, I'll just jump in here, and Jen will be able to elaborate on this more. There, through the International Association of Antarctic Tour Operators, have agreed that you cannot have more than 100 people on the ice at any one time from one ship, to ensure that the numbers are intimate and small, and that the wildlife has the right of way, and that we are treating it with the respect that it requires. And so of all the ships going down there, the very large ships are not allowed to land at all. So there are varying degrees of access. And our ships, the biggest is 148 guests. The new one you saw with the pointy nose is 126. So size is extremely important for the type of access you're able to have down in Antarctica.
I think that's true, and I can talk about it a little bit now. When you speak about the International Association of Antarctica Tour Operators, IATO is what we call it. We are members of IATO along with many other companies, and it's a self-regulating organization where we have all said, this is how we want to operate sustainably in this place. It's a fragile environment. It could easily be impacted by too much tourism. And so all of us have agreed to a set of rules that we police ourselves and say, we are going to follow this. And as Lisa mentioned, one of those is the number of people that can land at any given time. Another is the number of times any ship can visit one particular landing site in a day. We also have very strict, detailed regulations about how close you can get to wildlife. And we're very, very strict about it, because we don't want to affect things in a way that changes this place. It is too fragile, and it's changing on its own already. So we want to try and protect that as much as we can. And as we grow as an industry, we are reevaluating our policies as an organization to make sure that we can meet some of the challenges that come with having more ships and more demand to visit. So that's a constant discussion. This is an unusual photo. This is actually fast ice, which is frozen sea ice connected to the continent. And early season, I would say, is October, November. That's springtime in Antarctica. You often can find places with fast ice, and if it is secure enough, the ship can actually dock in the ice and we can get off and go for a walk. That's where you saw Lisa doing the cross-country skiing. That would have happened on fast ice. Yep. And it's a pretty extraordinary thing that we're able to do. People can get out. Again, this is on ice. You're walking on the frozen sea. And in this case, you can see the penguins are actually approaching the humans. So it's nice to be able to have those interactions, but again, we're very, very careful to keep our distance and make sure that we are not negatively impacting that experience. And of course, you can take funny pictures and get people involved in a way that makes the experience a lot more fun for them also. Now I wanted to talk a little bit about what sorts of activities you can do when you visit Antarctica. And again, this goes back to those regulations, where we land, how often we land, how long we can stay there, how many people go there. All of this is taken into consideration. We use Zodiacs, and this is what most small ship companies use. It's a small rubber pontoon boat with an outboard motor. And these are transportation to and from shore. They are also ways to get out and go on a tour, a cruise. But when we land, there is land here, there are rocks here, and there are places to walk. And you can do small hikes. You can do walks along the shoreline. There is opportunity to do this. You don't necessarily find really intense hikes where you're going a long distance and it's very rugged here in Antarctica because it's so vertical. But you do have places where you can go ashore like this and climb up high and get a really good view. We also have people that decide they want to do the Polar Plunge, and this is the mark of being in Antarctica and really saying you've had the experience, going into water that is at best 32 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a fairly warm day. You might see 34, but it's not going to be much more than that. And then again, another photo of the Zodiacs. We use them to go and tour in the ice flows. It's really beautiful to be at water level with some of this ice. It does make you feel very, very small, but you also have an opportunity to look for wildlife while you're out there.
Jen, I can't let you keep going without talking about, first of all, a polar plunge. I was there in 23 years old, and it took everything in me to get into that water, but I did it. I did it. It's true. For anyone who knows me, I like heat. So this was a big one for me. But on that temperature, we have Lauren who has a quick question just about comparing Antarctic versus the Arctic. Is one cold versus colder? What are the temperature differences like? Let's say somebody's visited the Arctic. Would it be similar?
It would be similar. And it's the thing that they both have in common is that they have a propensity for very dry air that is quite cold and a lot of wind. Wind is a common thing you find. But in both places, I would say that when you're visiting there, you're in the summertime for each of them. And so air temperature, a cold day in either place is probably going to be 25 to 30 degrees Fahrenheit, but it's dry. So it isn't that humid New England kind of cold that many of us have lived with for a long time. I went to college in New England, and it's different than a dry cold where I grew up in Colorado. That's how this is. It's very dry, but the wind is where you really need to bundle up and imagine you're going skiing. That's how I would say you would dress for either place. Water temperature is going to be very comparable between them.
From personal experience, yes, it is.
And please, if there are any more questions about the temperature or what it feels like to be there, let me know. You also do get snow. You're more often likely to get snow in Antarctica than you would necessarily in the Arctic. And it's just the time of year that we're there. It doesn't mean that it doesn't necessarily happen. But when I've been in each place, I would say the Arctic, you can tend to get a little more rain in the summertime as opposed to snow. In Antarctica, it's almost always going to turn to snow. So I've also had days in Antarctica that were 55 degrees, 60 degrees Fahrenheit, blue sky and sunshine. So there is a wide variance. That is certainly the exception more than the rule. Another way to see this place is by kayak. And getting, again, I mentioned getting on the water's edge. This really does it. Getting down low. You can see this enormous landscape covered in ice just behind the kayaker, and it does make you feel quite small, but it's such a lovely way to have quiet and sort of be by yourself with one other partner exploring some of the seascape. It's really beautiful. And wildlife, of course. These are, again, Gentoo penguins. We call this behavior porpoising. It's just sort of the shape of following how a porpoise moves through the water as well. Another thing that adds to the experience of visiting Antarctica is that nearly everyone who goes down there is working with an expedition team. And this is what I've been a part of, is the expedition team in Antarctica. These are people that love this place so much. And what they love about it is that it is such an extraordinary spot that very few people get to go. So they want to share that. They know nature, they know history, they know geology, they know photography, and they are there really to bring the experience alive. If you're coming to a place like this, you're not coming there because you want to be on the ship and have a floor show or a casino or a swimming pool. You want to go ashore and learn about this place and come back with a knowledge of what makes it fragile, what makes it special. And that's what the expedition team is a part of, making that happen for you.
And I think I'll jump in here too.
Please.
I think that the beauty of the expeditionary teams is their sheer joy. Some of these folks have been there 40, 50 times during their tenure with Lindblad. And yet every time you travel with them, you would swear it was the first time they were seeing Antarctica. Just the absolute joy they have in sharing this place. And there is no silly question. Often you'll have people, oh, I wanted to ask a question and I didn't, which I hope you'll all ask your questions today. But these are men and women who just want you to learn because they see you as being the new ambassadors to go back to care for these remarkable places. And so they want you to take as much knowledge and as much understanding and passion home with you as possible. And so yeah, they're just remarkable individuals who are just, and Jen is one of those, right? They love what they do and they just want to share it. And it's amazing.
It's fun to bring people who have never been to a place like this and see their eyes open. And I love this particular photograph because these are 3 of Lindblad Expedition's veterans. And the man in the center, Tom Ritchie, was actually in Antarctica, probably on Lars Eric Lindblad's first expedition in 1966. And he is still the guy, he's been there hundreds of times. And every time he goes ashore, he's the guy that will say, God, isn't this amazing? Can you believe it? Still after all this time, he's a marvel, and all three of these people are, and that's really, it's encouraging for everyone to see that they really make the experience come alive.
Smile never leaves his face. I've never
Never.
seen someone who smiles and loves what he does quite so much as.
So much.
Yeah.
Now, as they look at the environment and as they have been there multiple times, we have a couple of questions coming in. If I can paraphrase some of them, it is that some people are wondering, what about Antarctica is fragile? Yes, pristine, subject to human pollution, and there's lots of questions about how the human impact of visiting the area. However, just in terms of what you hear and what you have seen yourself from an expedition perspective, what are you seeing in terms of the fragility of the environment and the climate changes itself?
I think the things that I have seen are not going to be unexpected to anyone. There's less snow falling than there used to be. So when we used to arrive in October, November, you'd have a pretty decent snowpack all the way through December while the penguins are coming and building their nests and getting their eggs ready to hatch. And that is melting faster. The fact that we are seeing days that are in the 60s in the summertime, even if they're rare, they happen frequently enough. That is a telltale sign that things are changing there. The ice sheet, the break off of the big pieces of ice, we will see some of those giant icebergs as we're cruising around, but we don't get close to where the ice sheet is. The fact that those pieces are breaking off, however, means that there's instability and there is warming. I think you're seeing also in the penguin populations, this particular photo, I've mentioned this species several times, the Gentoo Penguin. There are three main species that you see around the Antarctic Peninsula, and the Gentoo are the ones that are most adaptable to change in climate. And they are now taking over old colony sites of some of the other species of penguin that are definitely more dependent on ice and cold weather for their year-round cycle. And seeing that change and seeing that expansion seems great for the Gentoo penguin, and it is, but for the other species, it's a sign that things have changed and are warming in places where they used to have cold temperatures year-round. Talking a little bit more about the wildlife, the reason that you're seeing so much of it here, I kind of touched on this earlier, is that most of these animals are dependent on plankton for their food. And Antarctica is a place where plankton, if you're thinking of this, they're small shrimp-like creatures. Krill is one of the main species that you're going to find. So the krill is what most of them are eating. And most people are thinking of krill as a small shrimp about this big. They're about that big in Antarctica. And we use the term plankton to describe them because a plankton is something that floats freely, can't really guarantee where it's going, can't really control its own motion. And krill are a kind of plankton. Most of these animals are eating krill. The penguins, it's indelicate to say it, but their poop is pink because they're eating so much krill. Whales are eating it. Seabirds are eating it. It's everywhere. So you're getting this incredible amount of wildlife. This is an Adelie penguin, one of the ones that is a little more susceptible to warmer temperatures. They need a colder climate, so they're moving further and further south along the peninsula itself. But all of them are fun and interesting and incredible to watch. They move around, they're constantly busy, they're incredibly noisy, they're pecking at each other, they're moving at each other's nests. They're one of the most fun aspects of visiting. And the colonies, many of them are still quite strong. They're just changing location and moving in numbers. So it's an incredible place to visit. And I wouldn't say that in the short term, there's a worry right now about losing some of these species. That could certainly change and may change. But at the moment, there is still quite a lot of diversity here. This is a Weddell Seal. This is one of the ones at the landing site. They just come up onto the beaches and we keep our distance from them, but they're very, very docile. They also sing. You can sometimes hear them underwater. These and leopard seals make a singing sound. And the Weddell seals are very, very deep divers. This is a leopard seal. They get a bad rap because they feed on penguins as one of their foods, but they also feed on krill. So they are all over the place and very, very sleek animal.
It was really interesting. I remember when we were on board, they were talking about the leopard seals and the adaptations of their teeth, that they're like, it's a bit like a broccoli. And so they come together when they take a huge mouthful full of krill. they then bring their teeth together, and these broccoli floret kind of teeth create a barrier, and then they just push the water out through with their tongue, and they've got this crunchy mouthful. And so it's, you know, everyone goes down there thinking, oh, they just eat penguins, but it's really remarkable how they've adapted and what they actually do eat.
It's, when you think about it, you don't consider that animals like a seal would be filter feeding something.
Yeah.
We know whales do it. We'll see some of the humpbacks and the photos of that, but it's true. They're diversified enough that they have meals year round, and they're feeding often on penguins, sadly, when the young ones are just starting to fledge, but that's the life cycle. You know, if you want to love penguins, you have to love baby seals too. So it kind of keeps it all going, but there is a tremendous amount of life here. This is a humpback whale, and the humpback whales in the Southern Ocean are much like the ones in the Atlantic, where their pectoral flippers, their long flippers, are solid white on both sides in most cases. And we get a lot of whales here, minke whales, humpback whales, lots of killer whales as well. And again, we keep our distance from them. This one, the engine of this boat is turned off completely, and they're just watching it as it comes through and is feeding in the summertime. The same with this one. This is another humpback. This is a minke whale. I've worked in places all over the world where minke whales are very, very shy, and you don't see much of them. Antarctica is the only place where I've had one follow my boat, my Zodiac, several times. And they're in some of the icy areas. They come up, they're curious, and we just give them a wide berth and enjoy getting to see them. And another humpback. And one more, and here's where you can see the filter feeding. The baleen are those little plates that look like hair on either side of the upper pink palate. And they're here, again, feeding for krill. It's an amazing resource for them. And then there's a tremendous undersea environment as well. This is a great photograph because it shows how close the ship is to shore and how shallow the water is, but also there are things going on right under the water surface. And the undersea environment is a really important part of this ecosystem that you don't necessarily get to see unless you have people who are diving down and taking video and bringing it back up, which is what many of us do. We have an opportunity to have divers go down and take high definition video footage and bring back this colorful marine life to show that it isn't just rock and ice and snow that makes this environment. It's also what lives underneath the surface of the water, and it is really incredible to see.
I think Jen brings up a really great point to just mention, because the days that you're at sea, or the days that you're moving from one place to another, or getting ready to do one landing or go to the next landing, is then peppered in with all these amazing experts on board who are taking this sort of photography, video, and having an experience on board that you wouldn't be able to get anywhere else. You know, it's this ongoing dialogue if you choose to be there with your nice cup of tea and your warm clothes, a very casual environment, but also the opportunity that no time is wasted when you're there. 6 in the morning, you have the bird guys up on deck, and they're watching for all of the wildlife. I'm sure their names aren't bird guys, but that's how I know them. And then throughout the day, you also have people both on board as well on shore with these experiences. So whether or not your activity level is up for getting off every day and going for walks through, or whether you feel like you'd be happier on the ship, I think being able to see something under the water is remarkable, and not something that you will find from many companies out there. It's a great question to ask if these sort of experiences are available.
Yeah, well, so often, you know, when people are on ships, they're looking from the waves up. They're not really thinking about what is beneath them, what that marine biodiversity is, and how healthy it is. I mean, to the point that we have equipment that allows you to look at the plankton in the water and see what's happening in that little microcosm of where we are in Antarctica on that particular day. How healthy is it? And so to be able to do that really brings to life what's happening around you for a full 360-degree view.
Absolutely true. I love this photo because for me, the thing that surprised me the most about Antarctica the first time I visited was the light. You don't think of this as something that is a major part of your experience, but it really is. You have sunsets that last sometimes 5 to 6 hours, and then the sun never fully goes down at the end of that sunset period. You have areas where you look out into the distance and you see shadows and light, and it almost looks like a storm is coming where you get the dark shadows of the clouds. But all it means is that those are clouds over the water, and the lighter clouds are over the land, and they're reflecting the snow. It's absolutely beautiful, and it changes all the time. And I think the lighting is something, neither of these photos has been doctored at all. The lighting is something that is a favorite for people who have been there, and it's not something that you necessarily consider before you visit, but it is absolutely beautiful each time. And I know I'm overusing those words, but it really, this is a place I think is one of the most incredible in the world.
So now you know there's no bad pictures.
That's right.
Just before we leave, there are a few questions coming in about the mountainous terrain that you're showing.
Yes.
A few people are surprised to see mountains. Can you maybe describe the different sort of terrains that you might run into when you're there?
Sure. The Antarctic Peninsula specifically is very, very mountainous. It's a landscape that is steep on both sides. When you get to the main part of Antarctica, the wider expanse, that can be quite flat, but there are also mountains. The Vinson Massif is the tallest mountain in Antarctica. So you do have mountain ranges that cross this continent, some of which are completely buried by ice. The peninsula is a place that's been carved by ice. You have glaciers and ice sheets that have come down and carved out this rock as they make their way, sort of moving downhill, being pushed by gravity. There are low spots where we tend to do many of our landings. They're sort of a flat area that will raise up, and you have a vertical expanse behind it. And one of the reasons that that's good for us is not only the access to it, but that's also where the penguins go. They also know that in many cases they don't want to climb. In some cases they do, and they will, and they're amazing climbers for those teeny tiny little legs. But they're also settling on some of those lower spots. But when you're visiting the peninsula, this is more often what you're going to see is really beautiful rocky coastline alongside you, and then in the distance, dramatic high mountains that go around, both in the South Shetland Islands and farther back in the peninsula itself. If you were to go to the main part of the continent, you might also find big ice shelves that come out, and this would look like a wall of ice, probably 300 feet high in many cases, that just looks like an impenetrable wall that goes for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles. And those are pieces where the ice has come off the top of the continent and on top of the ocean.
I will say also, Jen, one of the things that takes people's breath away is the silence. It is just such a deep silence. You can hear ice breaking miles away. You can hear penguins off in the distance. You can hear seals. It is just this, it is beautiful to have no outside noise. You know, when you're on the Zodiacs, or if you're on a kayak and you're out amongst the ice and there's penguins porpoising next to you and you're just looking up at these glaciers, it is just this deep silence, which is, I think, one of the real beauties of Antarctica, to be there and just be so in it. And you know, I think that's important to understand, that is one of the great things that Antarctica gives you, this deep silence that makes you truly appreciate where you are.
I briefly mentioned this at the very beginning, but I also just wanted to touch on two other places, South Georgia Island and the Falkland Islands, because they are often visited as well when people go to the Antarctic Peninsula. They'll go to the peninsula, they'll go to South Georgia and the Falklands as well. These are very different places than the Antarctic Peninsula. The landscape is quite different, the climate is different, the wildlife is different. But the thing that is the biggest tie is that even though the wildlife is different and the scenery is different, it's still extraordinary. And these are very low visited places. There are people that live on South Georgia Island year round, but again, it's a research facility and there is only one on the entire island. What you're seeing here is a colony of king penguins and their chicks. The white and gold and black ones are the adults. The brown ones are the juveniles and the chicks. And this breeding cycle happens year round. So whereas with the Antarctic Peninsula, we are there during the breeding cycle of those penguins, at South Georgia, it's happening all the time. And these brown guys, their nickname is the Oakham Boys. So when you see the juveniles, they always call them Oakham Boys. But South Georgia is the place where Ernest Shackleton and his men, after sailing in an open lifeboat 800 miles across the Scotia Sea from the Antarctic Peninsula. They lost their ship. They went to find help. They climbed over the top of South Georgia, across the glaciers on the top of it, and down into a whaling community on the far side. So there are remnants of the whaling history here. There are certainly remnants of Shackleton's history here. But the highlight of this is this incredible wildlife. You can see 200,000 up to 400,000 pairs of king penguins anytime you visit in multiple beach areas. You also get elephant seals, southern elephant seals, the largest pinniped in the world. They're gigantic, and they are all over the beaches in the early season, bellowing, fighting, looking for dominance, making their way, and we just stay back and keep out of their way. But what they produce are these little guys. These are called weaners, W-E-A-N-E-R-S. They've been weaned from their mothers. The mothers have gone back out to sea. This is an elephant seal pup. And this picture is zoomed in, I promise you. It is zoomed in from a distance. They are incredibly curious. If someone stands too long in one place, they're going to find one of these guys on top of their foot or their leg trying to nurse. They're very curious, and they're just trying to figure out how to be a seal, but they're all over the beaches, and they have these deep, dark, dark eyes. And again, you can see the reflection of the photographer in the bottom eye there at a distance, but zoomed way in. Also, albatross colonies. This is where the albatrosses are nesting in South Georgia and on the Falklands. But what I want you to also notice is the landscape here. There's grass. This is tussock grass. So when you leave the Antarctic Peninsula and you go to some of these sub-Antarctic islands, you're finding a milder climate. It still has glaciers, it still has snow and ice, and is very rough in the winter time, but there are grasses that grow here. There's a songbird, the South Georgia pipit, that lives on this island year round. It's an endemic species. So it is a very different kind of feel, a very different experience. And seeing albatrosses nesting, they're beautiful, beautiful birds, and they have an incredibly elaborate courtship display. There's also hiking. You can do real hikes in South Georgia. You can climb up from one of these beaches, and when you look down at this particular beach, you see a lot of different things. You see tussock grass, you see glaciers and mountains in the background, and you see penguins scattered all over the place. Every little white dot that you can spot all the way down that length of beach is a penguin. But people can hike here. You can walk in the footsteps of Shackleton, literally, in places that he went on his journey across the top of the island. And then, of course, we visit Shackleton's grave and do a toast to the boss there. And this is in the whaling community of Grytviken, which still has a lot of elements that were left behind from the whaling industry as a way to educate on the loss that happened during that time period and the fact that those species have really come back in full force. There's also a museum here, and one of the science communities is here. This is the Falkland Islands. The Falkland Islands are the only place I'll talk about on the journey where there is a year-round population. People have been living on the Falklands for many, many years. There are sheep farmers, there are ranchers. It is a place where people are living off the land and in very, very remote communities on islands, as well as in the main town. And Stanley is the main town. It is managed by the UK, as is South Georgia Island. They are two that are not part of the Antarctic Treaty. They are UK-based islands or managed islands. And the Falklands, Stanley is a little colorful town that really is the seat of the government here. And this is where the majority of the people live if they're not out on a settlement. When we visit Stanley itself, but we also go out to the remote outer islands. We might visit a sheep farm, but we're also very much going to focus on the albatross colonies, the penguin colonies, the fur seals, the dolphins that are here. It is a very diverse place. And I think the Falklands is often remembered as a place of conflict and a human population, but the wildlife and the scenery is extraordinary. It looks a lot like the islands in Scotland. If you think of Shetland or Orkney, that's what the Falklands remind me of. And I'm about to hand it over to Angela, but I just wanted to say, if you're thinking about going to Antarctica, I'm sure Lisa may have something she wants to say as well, but this is a place that we all love very, very deeply, and it's an extraordinary place to visit. No one ever leaves saying, oh, it was okay. I liked it. It was all right. No one ever says that. Everyone has superlatives like the ones I've been using to describe what this place is. And Lisa, I don't know if you want to say anything else before we hand it over as well.
Yeah, I will. I think it takes people by surprise how much of their heart Antarctica grabs. It's one of those places that you go to thinking, okay, this is a one-off, going to get to Antarctica, really want to do this destination. And then so often we have people come back time and time again with us because, as we're there for the 4.5, nearly 5 months, it changes from the beginning of the season. When I went cross-country skiing over sea ice, 2 months later, that's not possible, but you're seeing baby penguins. So, it changes. And so what was really remarkable on the day that we were leaving to go back across the Drake Passage, every person on that ship was standing on the back of the ship, watching it disappear over the horizon. And there wasn't a dry eye. People were just like, gee, I wish I'd got off one more time. I wish I'd lingered that extra 5 minutes for the last Zodiac. When you do go, just the more that you can get off that ship and be on the ice and be in the destination or up on the bridge with the captain, and you can sleep when you get home. I mean, it is just such a remarkable place. That's the one thing I'll tell you. Make the most of every moment because it is remarkable.
Well, we have a ton of questions jumping off from that point, and it's a great place to jump from. You mentioned there's about 4.5 months time period when people generally go. Can you maybe speak to the options going down? We've spoken about going through, starting in Ushuaia, going through the Drake Passage, going to the islands around, and then Antarctica. How long should people expect to be away?
Lisa, do you want to take this one or you want me to take this one?
Yeah, so there's a few different options, right? So Jen talked about the peninsula and then the peninsula, South Georgia and the Falkland. So if you've got a little bit longer, certainly being able to be all the way down there and do the peninsula and South Georgia and the Falklands is a remarkable experience. And that's 24 days. So it's an investment in time. The peninsula alone is 14 days from the day you leave home to the day you get back, right? So you're traveling down to either Buenos Aires or Santiago. Then we have a charter flight that takes you into Ushuaia. And then you leave from there and you head along the Drake, the Beagle Channel and down across the Drake. And over those 4.5 months, what is amazing is that there isn't a bad time. But when we work with someone like Angela, when there's clients that want to travel, one of the first questions is, what has compelled them to want to go to Antarctica? Like if they say baby penguins, then we're going to try and hone them in on the dates. So the greatest opportunity for our team to share that experience with them. If it's they want to go cross-country skiing on the sea ice, well, there's a time for that. If they're really enamored by whales, then later in the season, like February is the best time to be down there for that, for the larger number of whales. I mean, we see whales all season. I mean, one of the things I don't think we kind of talked about, which is really important, we are on wildlife schedule. So we had the remarkable experience a couple of seasons ago to see a pack of killer whales, and they were hunting a seal on the ice pack. The seal affectionately became known as Kevin. Why they called a seal Kevin, I'm not quite sure. But anyway, it happened around dinner time. And the expedition leader just announced, we have killer whales, a pot of killer whales off the bow. Every guest came up. Everybody stayed on deck. And I think, Jen, it was 2.5, 3 hours that those killer whales, and they were doing this amazing wave action where they all worked together in tandem to create a wave to push the seal off the ice. Don't get upset. Kevin actually was a pretty hardy little guy. He survived. He stayed on the ice and he got away. So it was a very happy ending. But to be able to see this pot of killer whales actually doing this is a very unique opportunity. Very few people in the world, even scientists, have been able to see this. And we captured on film, and our guests on board were able to just stand there and marvel in this experience, because then there's other opportunities where the killer whales have come to the side of the boat. So they're seeking enrichment from us. They're coming to us and vocalizing. And so when that happens, all bets are off. You know what? We can eat later. We can, whatever was coming, that comes second. And so those experiences are what really make Antarctica.
Oh, and I'm glad you brought up whales. You know, we saw a couple of examples of whales and zodiacs or people out on zodiacs. A couple of questions about managing safety, whether it's snow squalls or you're out on a landing or whether you're on zodiacs. How does the team manage safety?
You're never without an expedition team member near you at any point in time. We always split everyone up. So if you're on land, there are people with groups of guests the entire way along. If you're in a zodiac, you have a driver who's also your guide. Everyone has a radio that they are required to be monitoring. Everyone is listening for the call that something might be happening just in case. You have to be on high alert with that. In a zodiac, everyone has a life jacket on. If the conditions are too rough to either land or go out in a boat, we make the decision not to go. For us, safety is a very important piece of this. The same is true with the kayaking. If you're not comfortable kayaking, we would not put anybody out there for their first time, or we would have them go with an expedition team member. And the kayaks also have a zodiac patrolling the area, watching for anyone. It's something that's a really important piece of this because conditions can change very, very quickly, and we don't take that for granted.
Yeah, and I think it's really important as well. Some questions about how do people get around in Antarctica and can they stay on the continent? So first of all, you know, if you could just go over again for us the modes of transportation people could be used to down there. Of course, on foot being one of the predominant one, but also then do people get to overnight on the continent or reach the continent itself if that's their big point on their bucket list?
Every trip reaches the continent. Every trip has a continental landing for sure. Staying overnight, there are some companies that do an overnight, but it's going to be in a tent. if you decide you want to do that, there are no hotels, there's no lodging. Getting around, there are no roads anywhere in Antarctica. So the highway is the water. So if you're going to get around, you'll have to get around by ship. Some companies also fly across the Drake Passage and do a landing when the weather conditions permit on a place called King George Island. And again, it can be very, very iffy with the weather, but you also don't get the approach to Antarctica. You just sort of arrive there and boom, you go. As far as getting around on land, it is on foot. It is on, you can get across the sea ice on cross-country skis. We have snowshoes as well, but you're not getting from place to place unless you're on the water, really.
Yeah.
No, that's really fantastic. A couple more questions are still coming through, so send them on in. But Mary has a great question that none of us answered, which is, what's the connection with National Geographic and Lindblad?
That's a really great question. So Lindblad, well, we have to take a little bit of a history lesson. We have to go back a bit. So Sven Lindblad, Lars Eric Lindblad's son, has been at the helm of the company now for over 40 years. And he was always enamored by the pages of the National Geographic. His father would look at the National Geographic as kind of some of the direction as to where he wanted to go and explore. And so Sven realized that we had these remarkable ships going all over the world to these amazingly remote places, and the National Geographic was going there as well. So how could we work in tandem and support them and support their initiatives? And so I think it's 15 years this year, Jen. Is it 15? 16?
I think it's just past 15. We might be 16.
Yeah, so, 16 years since we created our alliance with the National Geographic Society. And we have what's called the Lindblad National Geographic Fund. And that fund allows our guests to support the National Geographic Society and Lindblad's work in all of the places that we go. And we have amazing programs supporting whale research. Every place that we travel, there is money put back into supporting the wildlife or the cultural component of those places that we go to. And that relationship allows us to support the National Geographic Society, but it provides Jen and the team with data and knowledge. And it also allows us to have the National Geographic photography program on all of our ships. So particularly in Antarctica, you're traveling with a National Geographic photographer in residence. So to have one of those guys by your side, and they are just as excited taking photos with a cell phone as they are with, you know, a big camera rig, and having you get the best shot of your life. But that relationship allows us to support them in their work.
No, I think that's fantastic. And if you were a betting person when it comes to travel to Antarctica, what changes do you anticipate seeing over the next few years, if any at all?
I think one thing that we're really not sure about is how many companies will be operating next year. At the moment, there are only small companies that will be able to go this coming Antarctic summer season, companies that have maybe 6 or 8 people in their small ships. But next year, we're hopeful that the companies that had planned to go this year will be able to go. I think that will be something that we'll see change. I also think that we will need to reevaluate with the Antarctic Association or the Association of Tour Operators. We'll need to look at the numbers and come up with a way that we can continue to appropriately manage our visits to this place so that when we leave, we have left nothing behind, and that we are not affecting populations and wildlife, that we are promoting good stewardship of this place. I think those are all things that will have to change as the demand to visit continues to grow. I don't think we're going to see large ships ever be able to land and visit, and that's great, because that would not be manageable in one way or another. But I do think we'll have more ships coming than we've had in the past, for sure.
Yeah, no, I think that's amazing. And Lisa, can you take just a minute? We had a couple questions about the ships itself. Can you talk a little bit? I'm not sure people know that the regulations are so severe on the environmental protocols for those ships, without telling us everything you know, which I know is extensive, but maybe just fill us in a little bit on what type of ships go to Antarctica. What can we expect?
Well, so we actually have just built 2 new ships. One launched just in time for COVID and launched in March. Yay, that was perfect timing. And that's that pointy-nosed ship that you saw that Jen showed earlier. So that's a new technology. It's actually an X-bow technology, that pointy nose. And the whole design of that, it was originally designed for the North Sea. So instead of riding a wave like a traditional ship, this ship cuts at the base of the wave. And so what it does is it diverts the power of the wave away and down the side of the ship. So it makes crossing the Drake or wherever we are in adverse conditions much smoother, much more stable, much faster, so cutting down on use of fuel, so makes her much more efficient. We're also a carbon neutral company, and that's great to say. We're always working towards lowering our carbon as well. We didn't just become carbon neutral and stop. We're continuing to work on processes that allow us to output even less carbon than we do across the entire company. But this ship is also an ice class 5 vessel. And when you talk in ice classifications, the lower the number, the stronger the ship. So a 5 is much stronger than a 6. And so this ship is specifically built to be in the ice year round, from the Arctic to the Antarctic. You know, everything we take with us comes home with us. Everything is cleaned between islands. So if you're going to one stop in the morning, we come back for lunch and the ship moves, your boots are disinfected as you get back on, all your equipment is cleaned. We even actually removed Velcro from our jackets because as you move from place to place, Velcro, well, it's great. It sticks to everything, and it sticks to seeds, foreign objects. The last thing you want to do is get off on another island, open your Velcro jacket and disperse seeds somewhere. And so we get down to this granular level on how we can ensure that we don't leave a trace that we were there. And that's exceedingly important. But as I said earlier, the size for us, our biggest ship, the National Geographic Explorer, is 148 guests. And when we built the new ships, it was really important to us that we look at, well, how can we manage getting guests off efficiently, quickly, so they're on the ice more than they're on the ship. And that's the Explorer, the further away from the picture, and the National Geographic Orion is at the front there. She's 102 guests. We decided that the perfect number, this 126, was the perfect number for us to be able to get people off and manage that time on the ice. And as we said, it's 100. So you're probably going, what do you do with the other 26 people? So when you've got 100 on the ice, those other 26 are in Zodiac safaris, or they're active. They're out there and they're exploring, so that you're not sitting waiting. Because if you've got 200, 300 people, you've got people that have to wait. So for us, it was always about, if you're going here, you should have the access and the luxury of time to get off and do as much as you possibly can with these vessels.
And I have to say, as we're wrapping up and we'll just keep moving forward, one of the most interesting things that people get to take home is a jacket. Can we talk about clothes for really quick second? I mean, what do I buy? if I need to go. What does a girl wear when she goes to Antarctica?
Do you do yoga, Angela?
I do.
Okay, so I think Jen would agree here. It's amazing how much stuff you're going to have in your closet, particularly if you're in a colder climate already. It's all about layers. Layers, layers, layers. Yoga pants, having a pair of dry pants, like waterproof pants for on the Zodiacs. I think the most important things I learned were take 4 or 5 pairs of really good socks. We have boots for rent, and they are the most wonderful boots. They're warm, they're waterproof, they're non-slip, they're great when you're walking on the ice and the snow, but your feet will get a little bit toasty. So you want to have dry feet. So take those extra pairs of socks so you can change in the afternoon. And always, I think, Jen, would you agree, you want more than 1 pair of gloves? When you're on the Zodiac, they'll get damp.
And a hat too, 2 hats.
And 2 hats. And so it's all about the 3 things that are going to make you feel miserable if they're wet and cold: your head, your hands, and your feet. It's like when you're skiing. So if you've got those covered, the jacket we provide you with has a zip out liner, that lovely big hood. I mean, you stay pretty warm. So the hats, the gloves, and the feet are really important. But most of the stuff you're going to have at home with you. And it's all casual on board. There's no jackets, no ties. You come back from a day of exploring, you rush back to your room, you spruce up a little bit, and you want to be back in the lounge for the lectures each evening and the talks with our expedition team, straight into dinner, and then, maybe to the bar or to bed, because you want to be up on that, up in the bridge early in the morning when we're approaching the next island or the next area. So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who's here. I'm just going to wrap it up, see if I can share my screen. I'm just going to do it this way. Let me see if I can do it real quick. Is that terrible? Can you now see my screen?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Well, we're going to leave you as any library should leave you, and that is wanting more information. Thank you so much to the Mark Twain Library for getting behind this idea of travel dreaming and taking a moment out of our day here in Reading or wherever you may be to think about other places in the world, other places that are as fascinating to visit, and different types of reading we might want to do. We have put together a reading list for you. It is both on the website, but you can also contact me at any time for it. And in fact, a lot of people often ask me, where do we go from here? And I always think the greatest gift that any travel person can give you right now is the gift of a travel plan. That idea that I have a place that I want to go, that I have a plan in mind for when I might be able to go, and I have someone looking out for me. That's what I do. That's what I do with amazing partners like Lisa and Jen. And most importantly, we have phenomenal pieces of reading that you can have around during the holidays, send to friends and family and say, hey, wouldn't it be really great if we could think about Antarctica or anywhere else we might want to go in the future? Speaking of places to go in the future, I will leave you with the idea that we won't stop dreaming here at Mark Twain Library. We are going to continue a series going to Mexico next for something completely different. But we are continuing a series both November, December, January, and February. But I have to take a moment here today and simply thank not only the great folks at the Mark Twain Library, but most importantly, amazing people from Lindblad Expeditions who took their time out of their day to share what I think are just beautiful stories and pictures. And I know that I have something very hopeful and happy to dream about tonight. So with that, I'll say a big thank you to everyone for joining us. Thank you to Lisa Bain as well as Jen Martin, and we will see you when we dream again.